Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Dr. Andrea Ferrero, and in this video I'll briefly explain the basics of total hip replacement surgery. What we call the hip is the name given to the joint between the head of the femur and the circular space in the pelvis, which we call the acetabulum. The most common reason for this surgery is osteoarthritis, a condition in which the cartilage in the joint is worn away. In this plastic model, on your left, you see what should represent a normal hip, with a smooth articular surface, which is markedly different from the rough, irregular surface in the model in the middle. When we operate on the hip, we simply replace the worn parts of the joint with artificial components, mostly made of a metal alloy. The presence of metal in the prosthesis suggests informing your surgeon if you are allergic to metals, such as nickel. Osteoarthritis is a very common disease in the population, especially affecting the elderly. We speak of primary osteoarthritis, meaning it has no apparent cause other than aging, to differentiate it from secondary osteoarthritis, which, as the name suggests, is caused by other conditions such as certain rheumatic diseases, trauma, past infections, or avascular necrosis. Avascular necrosis is a specific condition in which the blood supply to the femoral head is interrupted or significantly reduced, thus causing bone cell damage to the point of even causing progressive collapse of the femoral head. There are risk factors associated with this condition, such as excessive alcohol consumption, previous trauma such as hip fractures or dislocations, or prolonged cortisone use. It's important to remember that a total hip replacement can also be performed in cases of femoral neck fracture, as an alternative to the partial hip replacement, which is increasingly reserved for less physically active patients. In the case of a partial hip replacement, only the femoral component is implanted, without inserting the part into the pelvis, namely the acetabulum. In the femoral neck fractures there is a particular problem. The blood vessels that nourish the femoral head run along the femoral neck and can be damaged by the fracture itself. When the blood supply is interrupted, there is a very high risk of avascular necrosis and non-consolidation. For this reason, especially in elderly patients, we often resort to prosthetic hip replacement, partial or total. The trochanteric fractures, on the other hand, are found in a better vascularized area and are treated in most cases with osteosynthesis with a short intramedullary nail, which allows for rapid stabilization and early mobilization. In all cases, the goal of treatment is to allow the patient to return to walking as soon as possible, reducing the risk of complications related to prolonged immobility. Let's return to hip osteoarthritis, whose symptoms include pain that is initially mild but tends to progressively worsen over time, making it difficult to even sleep normally. The pain, however, typically worsens with weight bearing and significantly reduces with rest. Painful symptoms can obviously prevent patients from engaging in activities such as walking, gardening, cycling, or even just taking care of their home. It's important to make sure that pain doesn't also originate from the back. Therefore, I recommend telling your doctor if you regularly experience back pain, as it's also possible that part of the pain you feel in your groin could actually be coming from the back. In cases of doubt, even if the X-ray shows evidence of hip arthritis, I always prefer to perform an X-ray guided injection with a small dose of local anesthetic cortisone, so as to distinguish whether the pain is actually coming from the hip or possibly originating from the back. Diagnosis is generally very simple and requires only an X-ray. In some cases, a CT scan with 3D reconstruction or an MRI is also recommended. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, if there is any suspicion of a painful component originating from the spine, it will be appropriate to investigate this level as well with radiological tests. The X-rays remain an indispensable test and provide significant information both for diagnosis and for preoperative planning of surgery. This is a plain X-ray of the pelvis showing the articular surface of the femoral head, represented by the yellow dots, and the articular surface of the acetabulum, represented by the red dots. Between these two surfaces, represented in green, is the cartilage that allows the femur to slide smoothly on the acetabulum. In cases of osteoarthritis, this green space tends to progressively shrink until it disappears. In this other X-ray, you can see how the two articular surfaces are now in close contact with each other, as the space that would normally separate them is no longer present. The goal of the surgery is to relieve pain and allow proper mobility of the lower limb, using artificial components that recreate the lost space. We've talked about the indications for hip replacement, but now I'll finally tell you how the prosthesis is made. The image I'm presenting now compares an artificial hip on your left side with a completely normal hip on your right side. The first thing you'll notice on the two X-rays is that the hip prosthesis is inserted between the bony surfaces. Shortly, I'll explain how this is possible. Total hip replacement is composed of three main elements: the femoral stem, which is inserted into the canal of the femur; the acetabular component, a sort of metal cup that is fixed in the acetabulum, that is, the cavity of the pelvis that houses the head of the femur; the spherical prosthetic head, which fits between the two previous components, can be made of ultra-high-strength polyethylene, ceramic, or metal, depending on the type of prosthesis and the patient's needs. It is precisely this spherical component that allows movement between the different parts of the prosthesis, allowing the hip to maintain good mobility and functionality. There are many different models of hip prostheses on the market, but ultimately they can be classified into two categories. A hip prosthesis can be cemented or non-cemented. What we call cement is a type of synthetic glue that is prepared in the operating room a few minutes before implanting the final components. It is prepared under vacuum and begins in a powdered form. After the addition of a liquid component, it begins to polymerize, creating a paste-like substance that hardens over time, allowing the metal components of the prosthesis to adhere to the irregular surface of the surrounding bone. Generally speaking, but this is not a universal rule, cemented prostheses are reserved for patients with osteoporosis, which means with weaker bone, while cementless prostheses are normally implanted in younger patients or in any patient with good bone quality. Surgery is usually performed under spinal or general anesthesia. Spinal anesthesia involves injecting an anesthetic into the lower back to numb the lower half of the body. The patient generally remains awake, although they may be lightly sedated. It often offers a quicker recovery and less postoperative nausea. General anesthesia, on the other hand, induces a deep, temporary sleep with complete loss of consciousness. It requires airway control and can be used for any type of procedure, especially longer or more complex ones. Both are safe techniques. The choice depends on the type of surgery, the patient's condition, and the anesthetist's assessment. The first stage of the surgery involves cutting the femoral neck. The femoral head is removed, and the femur is then prepared with a series of rasps that create a regular cavity with linear margins on the inside of the femur itself, thus accommodating the shape of the femoral stem, which is pressed into place. As for the acetabulum, we also need to prepare the bone surface to create a smooth surface that can accept the prosthetic component. To achieve this, we use motorized reamers that, by rotating at high speed, scrape away layer by layer of the residual cartilage and the underlying bone, creating a smooth, easily bleedable surface. This indicates that we have removed the area of sclerotic bone, which is excessively hard and therefore unsuitable for receiving the prosthesis. At this point, we can insert the metal cup under pressure or over the cement layer depending on whether a cemented or non-cemented prosthesis was used. Once the prosthetic components are inserted, we test their stability and mobility. After surgery, full weight bearing is immediately allowed, under the guidance of a physical therapist. Rehabilitation can then be undertaken in a rehabilitation center or at home. In this short video, I show you a patient who had surgery a few hours before and he is already able to mobilize the operated limb on the bed. You can also see the hematoma suction tube, called a drain, which is used to drain the deep hematoma and thus reduce swelling in the thigh. Drainage is not always necessary. The patient is already able to sit up in the chair with little assistance from the nursing staff. Here we are on the second day after surgery, even before the removal of the drain that you see secured to the right leg with elastic gauze. You can now see the same patient in the office at 2 weeks using the 2 crutches only for safety and not because he really felt the need. Finally, here we are at the checkup 1 month after the operation. At this point, walking appears fluid and unimpaired, and the patient is able to maintain balance by leaning on the operated leg. Many patients rightly ask how long a prosthesis will last. Medical literature clearly demonstrates that the lifespan of a prosthesis is related to the patient's age at the time of surgery. Therefore, it is more durable in patients over 60, with an average prosthesis survival rate of 93% after 25 years, compared to younger patients, where the average prosthesis survival rate drops to 86%. This is undoubtedly due to the younger patient's greater level of activity and therefore use. Surgery has a very high satisfaction rate, but there are risks and complications. The main ones are listed below: infection, prosthesis dislocation, deep vein thrombosis, persistent hip pain, prosthesis stiffness, or soft tissue ossification, aka heterotopic calcifications. To name just a few, I'll focus in particular on hip dislocation, which is generally linked to incorrect movements that you must learn to avoid. Prosthesis dislocation is the dislodgement of the femoral component from the acetabular component. Depending on the direction of the dislocation, we distinguish between anterior and posterior dislocation. If this complication occurs, the patient should be put to sleep, even for just a few minutes, to relax the muscles and allow the prosthesis to be repositioned without reopening the scar. Only in cases of obvious prosthesis instability is it advisable to perform a new surgery to reposition one or both components. The risk of prosthesis dislocation in medical literature varies between 0.2 and 10%, depending on the data, but it can be described as occurring in less than 5% of all cases. Below are some simple rules to reduce the risk of prosthesis dislocation. It is essential to carefully listen to the advice of your physical therapist, but it is also helpful to discuss the matter with your surgeon before surgery. Another risk is prosthesis loosening, which occurs when the prosthesis is no longer properly attached to the bone and thus causes pain. If loosening occurs, a second operation may be necessary, in which the old prosthesis is removed and a new one inserted, usually larger than the previous one. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video till the end, and I invite you to share the video with others who might benefit from it. See you soon.